It's my great pleasure to kick off this panel. Did you know ocean technology fuels the American economy? We have two very distinguished panelists, and I could sum up their work just by their titles alone, which I think gives a very good insight to what they do and the mysteries of the technology that they're trying to explore. Dr. Frank Kerr, head of Ocean Battelle's Space Sensing Department within the Office of National Research, and focusing on ocean battle space. I'll leave that to be explained later. But that just gives you a sense of what we need to learn in ocean technology. Dr. James Bellingham with Battelle, specifically in the National Security Global Business Strategic Advisory Group, and a co-founder of Bluefin Robotics. We're honored to have both of you here. I'll turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Okay, so I'll go first.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm Frank Kerr, as noted. I'm with the Office of Naval Research, and we have a long history of developing technology for the Navy and Marine Corps. Now, if I can get the cue here. So our first slide. I've got a lot to talk about, and I'll try to run through it. I hope I don't go too fast, but we can catch up on some questions. So ONR has, since 1946, developed technology and developed science, and in many ways, it's arguably created the federal establishment that we have for funding academic research in the United States. Since '93, we've included applied research and early development of systems, and so today we have a program of $2 billion which goes from individual academic science grant proposals to the development of prototype systems, which the Navy then takes into acquisition, and these can run up to hundreds of millions of dollars. So our program then spans in what we call quick reactions for sailors' deck plate observations and ideas that they come into us with. Also, we enable acquisition programs by developing prototypes, as I mentioned. We do a lot of discovery invention, as we call, which is grant support for academics as well as applied research with a lot of small business. And then we have a series of marquee innovative prototypes, one of which is a large, high-powered underwater vehicle that I'll mention in the later stages here. So my department, Ocean Battle Space Sensing, works on finding things in the ocean and understanding the ocean well enough to be able to find them well. So we pay attention a lot to mine countermeasures, to anti-submarine warfare, and we have traditionally built the meteorology, geophysical prediction systems, and more recently the ocean geophysical prediction systems that the Navy uses to forecast the weather and the ocean daily for the fleet worldwide. And over the past decade or so, we've been focusing a lot of our work in the Western Pacific, a strategic region, as you've all heard from the President. We've tried to anticipate the strategic need of the Navy, and so we've been out in the Pacific with partnerships and doing oceanographic programs with Japan, Taiwan, more recently Vietnam, and with India. We have a new program starting with India as well. And so there's a lot of interest here. We're using a lot of technology to work these issues in the Western Pacific and understand typhoons, currents like the Mindanao Current and the origins of the Kuroshio, as well as specific features like internal waves. So all of the interest in developing processes and understanding processes in the ocean and the atmosphere go into building prediction systems. Prediction system is a geophysical model which assimilates data and therefore constrains the model. So it's an absolute prediction of the state of the ocean or the atmosphere in the next few days. Predictions work in the atmosphere out to about 7 days, and in the ocean on that same order a little bit longer because the ocean's a little slower. We've built 25 prediction systems for the Navy that are operating every day and being graded, and our work is being graded every day by the value of that prediction for the fleet worldwide, as I said. And these prediction systems run from global systems all the way down, nesting them as they go to the point where we can use those boundary conditions down to predict conditions for Navy SEALs going up rivers. So in order to do these prediction systems well, we've had to get at information that they use. And while we ingest a lot of remote sensing, we began to think many years ago that what we were missing was the in situ information within the interior of the ocean. We needed much more information that we could get from ships dropping XBTs, for example. So we began to think about the issue of building autonomous systems which would augment manned platforms for many missions, not just for oceanography, and to find a way in which that we could teach these systems the autonomous behaviors that are required in order to collect information appropriately and to then eventually evolve into an optimal sampling strategy, say for oceanography, which you get the information from this autonomous system in exactly the right sensitive area that the model prediction needs. And so we started out working these sorts of autonomous systems. Ocean gliders was an early development of ours, and also the powered UUVs. And so we're very proud that these UUVs have developed a small industry, which originally came out of SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research Proposals, which then grew up, and Bluefin was one that Jim was a founder of. And I remember, Jim, we were just talking, my first introduction to UUVs was with the Odyssey vehicle, and Jim took me out on Stellwagen Bank for an afternoon, and it was like Saul on the road to Damascus. The shards fell from my eyes, and I became a real believer. That was a long time ago. Today, all of these UUV companies, like Bluefin, have been bought out by, and Hydroid have been bought out by other larger organizations, and so the whole business of sampling autonomously in the ocean has grown up and has created a much larger structure, which there's clearly no turning back. And the Navy's begun to believe that as well. The picture in the upper left you see is one of the early Remus vehicles that's clearing the port of Qasr in the beginning of the Iraqi war, where the president announced that the humanitarian relief would come in within 24 hours, and the naval clearance team, that EOD clearance team that was over there, had marine mammals, and the marine mammals were airsick from being flown over to Iraq from the U.S., and so they didn't know how they were going to do this, but the Remus vehicle stood right up and made that clearance. It was a great opportunity. Our technology program at ONR for UUVs spans a wide range of interdisciplinary research to the development of prototype vehicles, from basic research in universities all the way up to industry now building larger vehicles. And we have developed quite a number of autonomy algorithms which are important in the development of, as I say, teaching these systems the behaviors they need for specific missions. You don't just build a vehicle. There is a huge amount of science that has to go into building a vehicle, and a lot of technology that has to go into building a vehicle. This is a Remus 600, a hydroid system that is capable to 600 meters, and all of these bullets and all of those little balloons around the vehicle represent programs that ONR in my department developed over the past decade and a half in order to create the infrastructure that was required to build that vehicle to do the things that we need to have it do today. Every one of those bullets represents large, often multiple million-dollar efforts in order to create this kind of infrastructure. Everything from power systems to control autonomy to acoustic communications, another whole area that we've supported quite a bit. You don't just go build a vehicle. You have to have infrastructure. You have to plan for it, and you have to be committed to it. And that's the message of this slide. One of the things that we, as an example, one of the things that we've taught the vehicles to do is cooperative behaviors. And in this particular case, we had two vehicles that we taught how to find a mine on the bottom of the ocean, and to then let somebody know that they found this mine. So the first vehicle we have represented in the upper left corner there is a raster search that one of the vehicles is doing. The vehicle finds an object that it really is interested in, and so it notes that location, and then it vectors in another, through an ACOM signal, vectors in another vehicle who does a detailed search, finds the actual object, and then through an ACOM signal takes a picture and sends that picture up to a gateway buoy that sends it to a decision maker who then sends back an information as to what they want that vehicle to do. This cooperative behavior effort we've demonstrated many times now. We've also taught vehicles how to walk along the bottom side of a ship and make a map as they go so they can navigate back to where they want to be. And we also have had to build a very high resolution imaging sonar in order to be able to do this. But now we have a hull searching UUV that can inspect the bottom of large ships. We're also, as I mentioned, using these UUVs for environmental applications, persistent glider surveys of the Kuroshio Current, near-shore surveys for contaminants off of the Navy SEAL BUDS course in Coronado in California, a number of other areas. Up in the Arctic, we're taking these systems up and moving them under the ice in the Arctic. So now we're about ready to embark upon a new effort. The Navy's asked us to expand our vision in terms of endurance and in terms of power, how long systems could operate in the ocean. To now, most autonomous vehicles can operate upwards to a few days at the most. We've been asked to try to develop a system that could go for better than 30 days, maybe 60 days. And this has required us to begin to think about whole new types of power systems that we could use beyond batteries to work these efforts. We're actually beginning to think of these vehicles more the way you might think of an automobile or some other large system that has to be extremely reliable and also has the endurance that you need in order to go many places over a long period of time, but also has to have the autonomy to keep it from getting into trouble. Power is one thing that I was just mentioning. It's way beyond the hatch box there at the end, is way beyond what people have been building for batteries. Fuel cells or combustor systems are power options for us. As an aside, I'm a little bit ahead myself, but here we have an instance of energy harvesting that we're using for gliders that you should see in the next couple of years. The possibility of ocean gliders having endurance of 4 to 5 years based on on energy harvesting between the higher temperature near the surface of the ocean and the cooler temperatures at depth. And as the vehicle cycles between the surface and depth, it gains more energy than it's using for the pumps to allow the buoyancy-driven control. So autonomy challenges in complex environments, situational awareness, as we say in DoD, about what the vehicle is seeing, how it understands where it is, and what it's the possible threats to it, whether they're environmental, running into something, an adverse current, or whether there's somebody coming out to look for them. Also, navigation is a big problem, and how we keep these systems on track, and how you can build very strict reliability into a system that's operating actually more like a spacecraft in many ways than the kind of vehicles that we've had experience with to date. So we're moving out into a lot of these areas. This autonomy issue also involves avoiding nets, for example. Gill nets are a big problem for an underwater vehicle, and so we're moving along and operating in that manner. Okay, so I'm ready. I'm done with my talk, but before I sit down, I wanted to say something about science, technology, engineering, and math. The need for us to develop young people who are interested in the kinds of topics that we all are interested in here in the ocean and in the technologies associated with the ocean is a critical need for DoD and for the Office of Naval Research. And this slide gives you an example of the necking down that occurs from all high school students and graduates down to PhDs. And of course, there's a similar slide for almost all professions in the US, but many of them don't get quite so narrow at the top as this one does. And the issue of how we prevent people from actually dropping out along the way who might make a good scientists who otherwise are finding a value in other professions is an important element, and we're beginning to put much more money into that. And in the next few years, our program in STEM will grow significantly. At the very bottom, I wanted to show you our commitment to graduate students, and this is the standing stock of graduate students that my department supports every year. It's about 600 graduate students. These are self-reported by our PIs each year in annual reports that they provide. And so we're very proud that these students are forming the next generation of technologists and scientists in our community. For me, it's a business decision to fund students. I can't find anybody who is smarter who will work for less, and we've all been there, and so I really thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and I look forward to your questions. Jim, over to you.
Well, it's a great honor to be here, and I'm very flattered to share the podium here with Frank. What I'm going to talk to you about is sort of a technologist view of the ocean. So I see the ocean as an unbelievably dynamic environment, not just as a physical environment, but also as a emerging economy, if you will. And I want to talk a little bit about where that comes from as well. There's been some federal investments that really have created this, or at least set the stage for this new economy. And there's a tension there as well, because as this new ocean industrialization occurs, there are real tensions. And those tensions are that we're frequently better at changing the world than we are at understanding it. And surely that's truer in the ocean than anywhere else. So one of the big drivers here, no big surprise, I mean, I look back at when I was born, and the world had almost about a third the number of people that it has today. And of course that has enormous consequences for resources. Surely we all understand that terrestrial resources are stretched, supporting this rising number of people. Sort of the optimistic picture, of course, is that the world becomes more prosperous and that increase in population slows. A more pessimistic view would be that the world is not prosperous, and in which case a lot of the assumptions that lead to the flattening of that chart in fact don't have the chart flattened. And so as a consequence, we really want the world to be prosperous, but prosperity has its consequences as well. So here I've just sort of taken one small measure that certainly resonates with many of us in the room, how many vehicles in effect there are per thousand members of the population. And you can look there's a very direct correlation to per capita income. And what you can see here is that many parts of the world, of course, are far behind us. And surely as they become more prosperous, you can expect to see greater consumption. And as a consequence of that greater consumption, increased draw on resources. What type of resources? Well, we're all very familiar with the demands, the energy demands of our economy. And what you can see up there in the upper left-hand corner, actually, is something kind of interesting. We actually passed peak oil production in the continental U.S. Some time ago, many decades ago. Of course, our consumption did not turn around at the same time, which means, of course, that we have net imports. If you look down there at the lower right, that gives you some idea of where we think the remaining oil is to find. Now, of course, we know that there have been large gas finds, if you will, or large increase in available gas, natural gas. But petroleum is something that we truly depend on for many things in our economy, and we can see here that in fact we're exploiting most of it as pretty much as well as we can. So how are we going to take care of the rest of these people in the world? I mean, how does the world take care of these people with this increased energy demand? Well, one answer is, of course, you go, as you consume all of those resources from the terrestrial environment, you turn to the ocean. And we've seen that already. Oil is a case example of this. Oil production moved into the nearshore environment many decades ago, maybe about a decade and a half ago, began to move into deep water production. And in fact, now you can see that deep water production from the Gulf of Mexico is significantly increasing. And of course, this is true not just in the Gulf of Mexico, but in other parts of the world. Some of the major oil finds have been off the coast of Brazil in very difficult waters to work in, high currents, rough bottoms, turbidity currents near the seafloor. So these are very demanding environments to move to go and extract the oil, go and extract petroleum from. Now, of course, that's not the only type of energy that you can think of from the ocean. Winds are roughly twice as high over the ocean as they are over land. So that one on the right there is a wind farm, and we're again familiar with the stories of wind farms being put along in the coastal environment. That's because, of course, those regions frequently do have very good wind characteristics. And then on the left, here's a project that spun out of NASA, which really revolves around using the ocean as a place where you grow algae, which you would in turn use to produce biofuels. It turns out that potentially this has very high density of yield. But again, this is using the ocean in a way that we're not familiar with using it. I mean, we've thought of the ocean as a place which connects us physically. We travel over the ocean to go to other places. We extract fish from the ocean, but by and large, the ocean hasn't really been an industrial environment. And sort of what I'm trying to point out to you is whole regions of the ocean today actually become a lot more valuable in the future. And I think that this is particularly true as you look at deep sea mining. We'll see if this slide works properly here. Yes. So deep sea mining, which of course has been discussed for many decades, has really become a reality. There are major investments in the private sector to create large-scale mining ventures, mostly in the far Pacific. And interestingly, if you take a look at where these are, sulfide deposits turn out to be one of the type of deposits that people are most interested in because the metals in them are easy to extract. What you find actually, if you look down there at the lower right, that cross-hatching, if you will, that's the ridge system through the world. That's where a lot of the sulfide deposits are. And if you look at the upper chart there, that shows you where the economic exclusive zones are. In fact, most of these sulfide deposits are in international waters. And there's a news story there I've clipped out from a year and a half ago saying that China is beginning to work through this whole law of the sea process of figuring out how to actually go through the permitting process to extract these minerals from the ocean. So no big surprise. Countries which worry about this resource issue are going to begin to turn to the ocean. And of course, we talked about the ocean connecting us in terms of commerce. That we use the ocean to move physical goods around, but we aren't kind of used to thinking about the fact that most of our communications occurs through the oceans as well. These submarine networks actually consume carry far more bandwidth, in fact, than the satellite systems of today. And then just to say that, of course, we are still depending on the ocean for food, feeding a significant fraction of the world that way. And if you look at the right, that is only going to increase in the future. And I love this graph here. It shows sort of the transition from hunter-gatherer to farming occurring in the terrestrial environment 10,000 years ago. And guess what we're going through today? We're actually going through that transition in the ocean environment today. Why is that occurring so late? Well, it occurs late largely because the technology is so demanding. So I did want to make sure that I return to this theme here of understanding what we exploit. There's many different types of observation systems that are really necessary to understand this ocean environment and understand the impacts of these industrial activities. And I won't go into the details of them, but there's a lot of robotic systems that have been created actually which give us this ocean capability. I can remember my old boss when I was back at MIT used to tell me it costs roughly 10 times as much to do something at sea as it does in the terrestrial environment. Multiply it by a factor of 100 or more when you go below the surface. And that's why robotic systems have really been a key to opening the ocean environment up, both scientifically and industrially. Things have changed a lot. So there's me. This is about the time maybe that Frank and I went to see on the left. That little vehicle there, that only ran a few kilometers. It had really minimal payload. It really was used as a software test bed. In between there, in the intervening decades, I spent about 20 cruises at sea in the Arctic, Antarctic, all kinds of places. And we've arrived back to a fairly small vehicle. So that vehicle on the right goes 1,800 kilometers. So a fairly significant difference. It carries a very broad range of sensors. So what is I was invited here largely because I guess I co-founded Bluefin Robotics. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how that process worked. And so this picture here is kind of taking me back to sort of the if you will, the timeline of the origin of one of these robotics companies. And there's a number of them, including there's people in the audience here who are who are colleagues in this activity. So I was at MIT. I founded the Autonomous Underwater Vehicle Lab there in the late 80s and ran it for 13 years. And so you can see there on the left-hand side of this chart, that's all the academic era. And in fact, our early funding came from Department of Commerce. It came from NOAA. I was in the Sea Grant College program at MIT. Fairly early on in there, we started going to sea. We founded Bluefin Robotics in '89. I'm kind of an accidental entrepreneur. I won't go into the details of it, but I kind of founded a company because I sort of had to. And then we founded Bluefin sort of about 97. 99, we started building vehicles. You can see sort of the succession of vehicles. And by 2007, things were changing fast enough that our little company really couldn't do it all on itself anymore. We got purchased by Battelle. So thus I'm wearing the Bluefin and Battelle hat here today. So very exciting days. And since 2005, I've had the tremendous good fortune of being able to stay involved. So if we kind of hop forward here again, there we go. So there's that NOAA funding era from Sea Grant and NERP. And there's the O&R funding era, which is to say that's still going on. So the federal investment in marine technology has been enormous. None of this would exist without federal funding. And that includes what's going on in many cases in the oil and gas industry. And so you can see there, Bluefin in 1998, we were in that set of 1998. Yeah, it was actually a building which MIT owned, which they leased us, and then we refinished the basement of it. Frank Van Mierlo was my partner in this, and the guy that really ran the business. And there's Bluefin today. So a real enterprise with a real building and real manufacturing skills. So I wanted to just say that there are other sources, of course, of funding for technology development, but they don't all fit in the same place. So if you look at industry here on the far right side there, in fact, industry spends more on R&D than the federal government does, but it spends it in a different way. It doesn't spend it, you know, on a project which is going to take 20 years or maybe even 30 years to come to fruition. And as a consequence, although it plays a role in making these industries real, a lot of times that early investment really comes out of the federal government in the interest of the taxpayer, who ultimately are going to benefit, but hopefully from these created jobs. So here we have a little company now up to sort of 90 people and really on a growth spurt, and developing a whole range of vehicles. So just in the way that you wouldn't think of having one kind of airplane, you have little airplanes, big airplanes, you have helicopters, you have a range of different platforms. Increasingly in the underwater environment, we have a range of different types of robots to satisfy different capabilities. Vehicles that go deep, vehicles that carry heavy payloads, vehicles that are shallow, vehicles that run along a hull, vehicles that last a very long time and carry very minimal payloads, but can telemeter their data back to shore. And there's an industry that's grown up. So here this is from the New England area, Massachusetts area. These are companies. Almost all of these have roots in funding, particularly from O&R. All of them interact, I believe, with NOAA to some degree or another. And there's look at that, 2,500 people employed in the Massachusetts environment in the robotics sector. So it's a growing part of our economy, and I believe this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. And so finally here, I think a lot of us who got our start out of the educational system really enjoy working with those bright young students who have sort of the sparkle in their eye and maybe an idea which we would be inclined to tell them, no, it's wrong, do it the old way, but they're going to go ahead and do it themselves. And there are these great competitions, some of which O&R helped create in the way of competitions, which get these students involved, get them used to working in a team, working in an interdisciplinary environment. And I think these are a tremendous way to entrain people into this. As a matter of fact, if you Google marine robotics, I'd be really surprised if competitions didn't show up as some of your first returns. So, and I think with that, I think I'm done, and I'll sit down and we can take some questions.
All right.
Thank you.
So we can't see anybody out here at this point. The light's in our eyes. We're at your mercy. There we go.
So Michael Jones, Maritime Alliance. Jim, you talked about 2,500 jobs in maritime robotics. Could you talk more generally about the Moten cluster and how many jobs you think there are in kind of the northeastern area that are maritime related?
Well, I guess I know I can talk to the robotics sector, which is certainly growing. The marine sector overall, of course, has been kind of hard hit. You know, if you look over a decade or two, Bluefin's actually in the Quincy shipyard. Quincy shipyard was empty. You know, there was an attempt to revive it. There was an attempt to bring marine jobs back to the New England area, and they failed. But now, of course, you have a marine robotics company there, and it's not an employer of the scale of the ship that the shipyards were, but hopefully with time that will grow. So you know, I think these things evolve.
Hi, Diane Davidson, consultant with Ocean Foundation. How fast do your robotics typically go, and do they have any kind of diversion built into them so they don't ram a whale?
Well, most of them go pretty slow, and I have to say that the ones that really spend a lot of time in the ocean go very slow. So, and I usually think in terms of centimeters per second for them, but so about a half a mile an hour is kind of, and so in other words, we're in much greater danger from a whale than it is from us. And those vehicles weigh about 110 kilograms or so. So they're not very large. You know, one of the charts that I showed there showed 3,000 floats in the ocean. That's the Argo array. That looks like a lot of floats, but if you think about it as an observation system, those things surface, by the way, once every 12 days. That's equivalent of like 2 observations in the state of California. So while they kind of look dense when you look them on a map of the Earth, in fact, our observation density in the ocean is so paltry compared to anywhere else. So we actually have very few systems. And I think one of the virtues of these mobile platforms is we get them back. So we're not throwing disposable systems in the ocean, which of course are going to end up on the seafloor.
So I could make a comment as well. Jim's correct. Many of the systems are very slow. Gliders are very slow. We have my group also does marine mammal funding for the U.S. Navy, and I think we contribute about half of all the marine mammal funding in the world. We're very interested in the ecology of the whales and other marine mammals. We've developed tags that go on gliders as well as on the animals as well to understand what they're hearing, where they're going, how they're diving. It's been very, very helpful to our understanding of the group behavior of beaked whales, for example. The larger vehicles that we're working on all have permits, and we pay attention to not only the issues of bumping into things, but also of whether the sonars that are used for understanding what's out in front of the UVs are too loud, and so we're paying a lot of attention to that. So, thank you for your question.
Since I have the mic, I'll ask a question. It seems like there's just judging from this, and I got to say, between the two of you, this is really interesting. There's sort of 2 classes of robotics that are going on. One is sort of exploratory, telemetry, monitoring, sensing, and that kind of thing. But the other one that really got my attention was the ship hull cleaning, the inspections, and so, which is a more utilitarian. Like, let's go down and do a job. Let's do a task. So I'm wondering, with the emergence of offshore wave energy, offshore wind energy, potentially aquaculture, net pen cages, all that stuff. What do you see unfolding for robotics in a task-oriented way, as opposed to simply research and monitoring and building these vehicles to support those industries, which I think all of us have kind of thought about, well, you got to go out in a big boat and put people overboard and all of that stuff, as opposed to having robots do it. So,
Do you want me?
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question, and it goes to the central point of why you have the robotics altogether. For the most part, you're going to want to have a robotic vehicle when the mission is dangerous or it's very dull, or it's costly, and with an autonomous system, you might be able to reduce the cost in some way. And so there are a range of these missions out there. Our autonomy behavior libraries are growing, and essentially what we have today is how to teach the system, like build an expert system on it. I think that anything that's monitored will move to an autonomous system in the future. And aquaculture, or we're beginning to think about UUVs as monitoring tools across the board. And as you see, we developed them for oceanography, which is kind of a monitoring, it's a sampling issue.
Yeah, I think I'd echo some of what Frank said there. One of the things that I think allowed AUVs to become useful platforms in the ocean environment was we really distilled down to some very simple set of tasks that we could actually accomplish with a robot. So it's an environment where a person, of course, is terribly expensive, so any simple thing you do actually is useful. And so as a consequence, those early vehicles are actually remarkably simple, and we're very proud of just simply the fact that they do those simple tasks well. Now, when you go to one of these robot competitions, what you see are a group of students who frequently have a much more impressive toolkit than we had. They're versed in vision systems. They're versed in AI techniques that, of course, really didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. And I think what you see is a change in the type of robotic problems that people are taking on as these new skills, and particularly these people who are trained in the new skills, begin to come to the market. So I think it's some real changes in the future.
Hi, thanks. I think I'll stay sitting. Leslie Ann McGee from Battelle. Just a quick comment. I wanted to get back to the STEM issue, which is sort of one of the reasons why this panel was put together, was linking this new industry, or not new really, but newer industry back to STEM and economic growth. Battelle is technically a charitable trust, and we give away our money mostly to STEM education, which is a great benefit of owning a company like Bluefin, where we make money and then we give it away to mostly K through 12 education. My question is, what do you think this industry can do, not just the for-profit side, but also the government side, because the government is somewhat of an industry here in this area, to sort of more formally bolster that K through 12 STEM education, so we can actually form these kinds of jobs in the future?
Well, in the work that we've done so far in STEM at ONR, we've begun to realize that that kids respond to role models, to they look to heroes, and so these competitions are important. Dean Kamen has a competition in robotics that is particularly valuable because it really engages the kids and creates local heroes out of the winners of these competitions, and people and communities all get together in that area, and that is an alternative to sports heroes or entertainment heroes. Robert Ballard is in the same kind of position, where he has developed a way to engage young people on the wonders of the ocean, and going to sea and being engaged. So and he follows them. What I like about what Robert's doing is he's following these young people, or having them follow him over a period of time as they've grown up, so that there are many times when you can opt out of science. You decide you're not going to study for that test. You're going to go out with your friends or whatever. And if there's a way in which we can, or somebody, some hero, a local hero, a national hero, can bring a person back to their books, to their studying, to understand the value of math, rather than go off with their friends, then I think that we're going to get more scientists and engineers.
Just a quick one. Thanks for that, guys. I wanted to ask you about China, and how obviously they have a big vested interest in the technology as well, to try and realize those resources. How do you think the US is competing against China, and do you think China will catch up in AAVs and submersibles?
So I visited China in the fall. And did sort of a whirlwind tour of marine laboratories there. They were very open. Let me take pictures of most of the things I saw. And you know what I would say is, candidly, they have impressive facilities that they're building. They are struggling to populate those facilities with top flight researchers. That's harder to create, and they're struggling with what programs to create, which are going to drive those research institutions and what the focus should be. They've written their Academy of Sciences has written a plan and it's very resource-centric. If you look, as a technologist here, if I read through U.S. plans, you can frequently see sort of defense concerns in the background. As I read through, the Chinese documents, I see resource concerns. That's kind of one person's take on it.
So clearly China is a sensitive issue, and DoD is looking at China, and we want to help to have a world order in the future which includes countries all working together in many areas. There's a lot of sensitivity in DoD about China. I was over in China 2 weeks ago. Actually, ONR was supporting a conference with the Chinese Academy of Sciences in ocean acoustics and basic research. There's a lot of sensitive, as I said, a lot of sensitive topics that we have in DoD, but there are some topics, and research is one of them, basic research is one of them, which we can talk together. And so we're choosing to form partnerships as we can on those topics that we can talk about. The scientists are becoming better and better. Right now, many of them are following a trajectory that they can see in Western science, recreating things that and topics that we've done, and I believe that over the next 5 to 8 years, they're going to start to emerge out beyond those particular topics. The value of our engagement is that we supported through some joint field efforts back in the mid-90s, before things got quite so sensitive, graduate students at sea with us and our investigators at institutions like Scripps, or et cetera. But now these folks are full university professors over there, and some of them that we've seen in the early 2000s are now assuming leadership roles in their institutions, and we get to know those folks. So China is going to get richer, and that's good for the world, I think. The trajectory that they are traveling as a nation is much like the U.S. trajectory in the 1870s to World War I, where we were the manufacturer of the world, and we took over from the British that role. Now China is moving quickly to develop that same kind of worldwide manufacturing as we can see everywhere. The richness of for the country is growing westward, starts in the east and growing westward. That mirrors the way the United States developed as well. But I like to say that it wasn't until the 1930s that the U.S. felt rich enough to even consider rural electrification, in which every house was given a plug to an electrical outlet. And that was a long time after 1870. So.
Stacy Lewis from Ocean Leadership. Thank you so much for coming today. It was really interesting kind of comparison to the federal R&D investment and then a sector coming out of that investment. I think it's a case that the Josie panel before you were trying to make, in the difference between investment spending and consumptive spending. So my question is, given the fact that we've had so much progress over the last 10 years in building this sector, what do you foresee the federal government's involvement? Will the federal government become a customer of the industry, or do you believe there will still be R&D development driven by the federal government, followed by the industry's lead?
Should take a...
The federal government's going to do both. It's going to be a customer, especially of autonomous systems and more vehicles that populate and civilize the wild ocean, if you will. All this ocean infrastructure, whether it's cabled infrastructure in the bottom of the ocean, observatories, UUVs, sampling systems that are tied to the surface, all of that's going to occur more and more. We're going to get to a point where our observing systems, these prediction systems that I talked about, have real economic value, for example. If we can merge climate-related modeling with forecast modeling that we do at ONR, to extend the forecasting out into weeks rather than days. That'll be a huge benefit to everyone. I think it's a very rich time that we're moving into with regard to engaging industry and in observational science in the oceans, and to work together.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of specialization. There'll be growth in niche markets, which will then expand into markets that we probably at this point can't even conceive of. What's going to happen in offshore aquaculture? I don't know. What role will robotics play in that? Probably something. What happens with the equatorial Pacific, which receives most of the sunlight on the planet? Is there a way to transport that energy back to land? There's all of these questions, which if you look at it over a period of decades, which is really what it takes technology to develop. I mean, all these overnight successes were created on the backs of decades of investment. And it's very hard to predict, other than to say that we will see an increasing specialization, and you can see that already. I mean, in the early days of AUVs, we built the whole darn thing from scratch, right? We built the motor controller boards, we did the software. I mean, sometimes we rolled our own operating system. It's kind of embarrassing, and it's part of the reason why those vehicles weren't that capable. Today, there's a whole set of companies which produce specialized instruments and sensors and software for these various types of autonomous platforms, and that's why the platforms are so much better, and that's going to continue, and that's going to continue for decades. And some of those far-reaching, really transformational changes, hopefully, will be funded by government.
Hi, Will Knuckles with WH Knuckles Consulting. My interest, sort of ongoing interest over a number of years, has been about federal efficiencies and trying to get as much as we can out of the federal dollars that we're currently spending. You'd mentioned the partnership between ONR and NOAA that's been going on for some time, but there's another 20-some federal agencies out there, and I'm wondering, how would you characterize the extent of the partnerships with those agencies, and if it's sort of a de minimis level, which I think it is that because of a lack of authorities or tasking, or is it just that nobody's asking you for help to build those partnerships in the first place?
Well, in 1997, Congress passed a law called the National Oceanographic Partnership Program, which gave Navy some responsibility to help to develop partnerships in ocean-related science. And we've been operating with our federal agency partners under the NOP program for since then, since '97. NOP, I think, now entrains upwards to $40 million from different agencies for basic research and some applied research topics that come out on a BAA every few years. So I think there's rich opportunities for partnering. It's not just NOAA and ONR, but it's NSF quite a bit, and it's also Department of Interior and Department of Energy as well, and some NASA efforts. Those agencies that are really interested in the ocean all work with us together.
We're here. Hi, thank you. Wondering about the access to capital. You showed a slide earlier about who's spending money where, a little bit about who's spending money where. And I live and work in Northern California, and sort of the venture capital of the world. And wondering, given how fast you are explaining that technology and thinking and challenges are moving, and how venture capital is interested in relatively quick return on investment, how is the access to capital working out in the private sector? Private capital.
Yeah, great
sector.
question. And there's some other people in the room here who can really address that as well, perhaps in conversation afterwards. I mean, certainly when we started Bluefin, we started it during the dot-com boom. And, we went and we said, our company's going to be worth hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions? I mean, you're not even on our radar screen. And how long's it going to take you? Well, a while. So there was just no possibility, really, of of obtaining venture capital, or at least we gave up after some efforts, and turned to family and all the usual bootstrap methods to get the company going then. That I don't think is so true anymore. I think these days venture capital is available, and there are some companies. Liquid Robotics has managed to corral a fair chunk of change for their venture. So I think that I think that's changing, and I think there's a number of things. It's how do you look overall? How is the industry progressing? Are the markets, because it's very much a market creation problem. I'm going to build this vehicle, and what are you going to do with it? Who's really your customer? So that whole market creation phase takes a while. Well, some of the markets are now reasonably well established, and there are people who operate these vehicles and make money with these vehicles every day, and so that of course changes everything, and it ripples through the entire supply chain. Yep.
And we see more and more people, more and more companies developing underwater vehicles of all types now.
So I think that's a wonderful question to close on, because if there's one point to take away from this panel discussion, it's that investment in ocean technology, whether from the private sector or the public sector, really drives innovation, growth, and prosperity, not just for our blue economy, but for our national economy. With that, let me thank Dr. Herr, Dr. Bellingham,